So, because I've been an artist since birth, like most of you all, and John McCurdy was my first teacher, who some of you probably remember. Anyway, so I decided to start with a little lifer. This is a life review. This is the John McCurdy period.
Okay, if anybody wants to
I'm
go up
going
to
to-
see it a little closer.
Yeah, I could actually pass it around, but because it's framed. But John McCurdy was very big on
Okay, anybody
making
needs
a
to look at it.
painting. Making a I'm going to do that. Making a painting.
My eyes aren't good enough to see.
I was 15 years old. My mother taught me how to paint. She was an artist. She was a teacher.
See, I
And
never
then
knew
she
that
decided
before. I never knew that before.
Oh, well, you see, you get one of these wonderful salons and you find out all kinds of things. Anyway, John McCurdy's technique, he was a regionalist, was in order to paint a painting, you needed to make a value drawing first. So this is a value drawing. I never made the painting, but the value drawing survived. I don't know. We went on to other paintings. I don't know why this one was never done. This is Lafitte Blacksmith Shop. And the way that you made a value drawing was you had to draw a grid, okay, no cameras, and then you had to do your drawing within that grid, and it's a light and dark drawing. So you kind of use the kneaded eraser to take away so that you get light and dark. And I'll pass it around so you can see the technique. Then if you're going to do the painting, you take the canvas and you make the grid. And you actually physically, by eye, transfer from the value drawing to the painting, and then you work on the painting. So that's John McCurdy. And he was a painter who did what's known as underpainting. But it was unlike the traditional European underpainting that Rembrandt did. It was simpler, but it was still underpainting. So you had to have your opaques that were light, and you had to have your transparencies that were dark. So if you didn't layer the painting properly, you actually never got a good painting. And so that's John McCurdy, and I liked him. I thought he was great. And I found out later that my mother and he had something in common, and they both died of it, and that was cancer. And he was a very inspiring teacher. His critiques were something like, he had like this long pole that looked like a pool stick, and he would sit on a chair, and you'd line your paintings up against the wall, and you'd sit there, and he'd just point, he'd go, and then he'd point to the next one, and he'd mumble something. And then he'd point to another one and he'd mumble something. He might suggest a few things, and then you went back to work. And he survived because his school was funded by the United States government, because the vets came back, and part of their war money, whatever that was called, I forgot, was to go to school. Their educational benefits was to go to school. So you had all these people in his school who, soldiers, like Henry Caselli, and I don't remember, there's another real famous one here in New Orleans. Well, actually, he lives in Covington, I think. And so a lot of his students are still around. My parents paid for mine, so I didn't go to school. My father went. He didn't get the benefit. He didn't go to school. Okay, so I have, throughout my development, gone through various periods. This period is when I was in college at UNO. I think somebody said they went to UNO. This is the only surviving photograph of the first piece of sculpture I made in college. And the sculpture was so heavy and big, and we never fired it because it was improperly made, that I threw it out one year. But I kept the picture. And Mr. Smith, John Smith, started the art department at UNO. He was a funny little fellow. And he came up and he looked at me working on this sculpture. At first it was a portrait of Stravinsky, and I didn't like it because it was a realistic portrait, so I smashed it up. And I started building this kind of Cuban, Freudian-looking thing with different consciousnesses And of course it has another side with another face on it too. And it was like a big head of all these different consciousnesses and thoughts. And he looked at it and he said, "You need to quit taking classes in college." I said, "Why?" He says, "Because you'll just be ruined by the philosophy of art department. So quit. You're a natural sculptor. Go out and do your work and forget it." So I did that. So I'm actually a self-taught, except for Mr. McGrady, artist. But this is firing clay, which, you know, I really like it, and I want to do some more because my style in sculpture really hasn't changed. It tends to be cubistic, or it's figurative, but it doesn't move. My sculpture hasn't changed as much as the painting has. The painting has gone from what you saw there, which was kind of realistic painting, to what you'll see. And I went through more painting periods than I've been through sculpture periods.
Phyllis, was Smith a big guy?
Yeah.
I took his sculpture class too.
Ah.
Maybe
did?
went out.
Yeah. He taught sculpture. I think he committed suicide, didn't he?
What?
Didn't he commit suicide? I think
I
he was
hope
one of
not.
those teachers out there that committed suicide.
Oh, I don't know anything about that. I just took this one course from him.
He's
Somehow
not
I
I
person
also
that
taught the history of art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a funny little fellow. This is the 80s, 1979 and 80s. There was a man here named Stu Carstetter. I think he was from New York. Anyway, he ended up marrying one of our classmates, Leslie Lichtblau. You remember? Anyway, Leslie was an artist too.
So y'all went to school together?
Yeah, we were out. First class, second class, you know, we're still here. There were only 200 of us, so, I mean, when you meet one from the early 60s, we all knew each other. Stu Carstetter was a painter, and he was heavily influenced by the metaphysical paintings of the Italians. So we used to have dialogues. If you look up metaphysical painting, you'll see the Italians. It's like Giotto and Friend. Well, he and I used to sit around and have these painting dialogues. So this is a painting dialogue I had with Stu Carstetter. If you get up real close, you'll see that there's actually features on this face, but you can't see it at a distance. And the reason why I did this is because the metaphysical painters usually put eggs for faces with no features. And they were semi-mechanical looking things. So I did that, but I did it a little differently because my argument with Stu Carstetter, my painting dialogue, was when you get up close to someone, you're going to want to see their features. If you're going to have intimacy of any kind with this painting, you've got to have features. And we used to argue over which features were the most important features. Of course, it's the eyes. So when you come up close here, you'll see that there's a reveal of paper, and that paper is the features. In the meantime, this is also about self-knowledge because there's a person looking in a mirror in a neighborhood. So I had moved to Bywater at that point, and I was having a dialogue with the neighborhood. So I have a lot of paintings with Stu Carstetter doing dialogues. This is gouache on paper, and I like opaque because I can't paint pastel. Also, I can't thin the paint properly. I took classes from her friend when she was here, and it just drives me nuts, you know. So I don't do that. And then there was another famous New Orleans. I was young. I was in my 20s and 30s. And all these New Orleans artists were around, and so I decided I would just have dialogues with all these guys. So this one, you know, painting dialogues, it's an old-fashioned way of, you know, European way of doing things. They paint, you paint, they paint, you paint, and you just have these dialogues back and forth like that. Maybe you could say something.
I didn't have any dialogues.
You didn't? I did dialogues with three different people, and you know, the work is.
I got married, had my kids,
similar.
and went back to school.
Hmm?
I got married, had my children, and then went back to
Oh.
school.
It must have been that philosophy background that you have.
Well,
brought
it's
a lot of it
actually
in.
European history, because in order for me, because I didn't take it in school, I had to learn it myself. So McCready would flip books, you know, and you'd study the books. And then I ended up with this huge library of books. So I would study European painting or European sculpture. I still do it and go back and look. And then American. And you learn about the styles of paintings in various periods that painters and sculptors go through. Well, this was, let's see, Stu Carstetter and Robert Gordy. Y'all remember Robert Gordy? He's still got stuff in the, you know, he's still got stuff in the museum.
Right.
Well, he got criticized by Stu Carstetter. Stu Carstetter started the Department of Art at Delgado. There was none before he went up there and said, you need one. So he started it. So he and a couple and other people were criticizing Gordy. We were all on panels. We used to do things like that. You know, we'd have panels and we'd all give different views. And I remember Angela Gregory showed up for a couple of them. So, you know, we all knew each other. And Ida Kohlmeyer and, you know, people who are now, you know, deceased. Well, Robert Gordy was painting what Stu Carstetter said looked like, you know, curtain fabric. And if you go look at his work, it really is. It's repeatable patterns like this. You know, like he was a commercial artist. And so Stu and he got into this big argument. There were other people. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing fine arts. Why are you making these pieces? Well, then Robert Gordy got A's. And all of a sudden, the last 6 months of his life, he's painting a real, you know, fine art. And what he did was he did a series of drawings, which are about this size, in a gallery on Julia Street. I don't remember the name of it. It's still there, but it's got a different name. And there was a whole wall, 2 walls, of just simply the same size pictures of mostly men, you know, faces. And it was so depressing. But at least he broke out of the, you know, the fabric wallpaper. So I started doing my version of Stu Carstetter too. You know, I dialogued with his painting. Oh, that's one of them. This was 94.
That's nice. That looks like it's Picasso. It's Picasso.
Oh, Picasso's one of my influences.
Okay, it looks like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I went through a very heavy Picasso.
What is that
Cubist
type of art?
Picasso period. Yeah.
What I found very interesting is the experiences that we each have had in our lives that got us to the same point of joining the Women's Caucus and dialoguing with each other. And you said, well, did you do dialogues? No, I didn't do dialogues. I was not in that particular group. So that's why I think this is a good thing to do with each other. The younger people that were not exposed to these things will have a new approach to painting. And the people that didn't have that same experience because they were focused on something else in their life at that time will know what was. So I think it's very beneficial.
Well, you know, it was Picasso and Brock that used to have these painting dialogues.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's how I found out about it. Now, I'm sure that other American, I mean, I don't remember the history of painting dialogues, but, you know, they'd come to each other's studios and they'd have a disagreement and one would go home and make a painting and bring it back, and then the other one would have a disagreement, they'd go make a painting and bring it back, and then they'd have this painting dialogue. So in the early days of Cubism, Picasso and Brock had these dialogues. That's why nobody could figure out who invented Cubism.
I just read that.
Yeah.
I just recently.
Because they were just talking to each other through the work.
Anybody else has a question so far? She does miniatures.
Well, I have to, I'm trying to bring you up to date. This is 2002, and I'm still sort of stuck in this period, because the last thing I showed at the Women's Caucus for Art was calligraphy. I have a heavy Asian influence. Started when my father was drafted and got sent to Japan during the Second World War. He was Reconstruction, I don't know what they called it then, I forget. Anyway, he was a major and he was over there. So he used to send things home that they traded for cigarettes. My father stockpiled cigarettes and they traded cigarettes for whatever the Japanese brought, because they didn't have any currency. They'd been bombed and they had no economy. child and didn't even know it. And I could go in and touch it and feel it and talk to it, and then it all got sold for nothing, so I'm not a millionaire. But I did learn to feel the work. It's in museums, of course, because somebody else got smart. I did feel the work, and I got up close to the work, and I could feel and touch the artist, and got into doing calligraphy with a brush. Took some classes from some Japanese in calligraphy, and I decided in 2002 I wanted to do miniatures, so I did a series of small miniatures. Those are two of them. And then at the last Women's Caucus for Art, I did a painting that was on a strip of paper about yay big. There's a Japanese painter. His name escapes me. But what he would do is he would take a roll of paper and he would just throw it out. And he would start with a mop. He built his own mops about yay big. And then he'd have this big vat of ink. And he'd put his mop in the ink and he'd hit the paper with it and drag it for, half a block.
Who was this?
I forget his name. He's very famous, he's West Coast. And then he would cut each section up and sell the sections off. He studied Aikido.
Mopping.
So he started, he painted like he was
Art by the inch.
a warrior painter. So I decided I wanted to do something really big. So I had trouble getting the paper, but we did find it. Anyway, a long, big sheet, and I started at the top of it. I had to do about 4 of them before I could get the hang of working that big. And I couldn't get a brush this big, so I had to work with a brush about that size, which is the best I could do. And I started at the top, and I came down and finished it up. So it's a big, long piece of calligraphy. Well, that's sort of where I stopped.
And where are you going?
I don't know.
Well, when she first got here, she
I
was
haven't a
remodeling
clue.
her house somewhere.
Well, I do work for